How do you feel the state of racial justice is right now? What specifically discourages you, but what also encourages you and gives you hope?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously the shootings and the killings that have been in the national media have really been devastating for so many. Tamir Rice was devastating in that my son is 12 years old. And when you see the images of that 12-year-old jumping around in a park, that's exactly the way my son would hang around in a park, jumping around. And he probably has some toy guns that he might just kind of wave around for fun. And then to see that split second, we're not talking about freeze, drop their weapon. We're talking about a split second where a 12-year-old was gunned down, and then to have no repercussions. That's devastating for a parent to see that. To say that if that were my 12-year-old, I don't know what I would do. I would freak out. So I think that has drawn attention and hopefully made it very personal. The shooting inside the church. I mean, how many pastors on a prayer meeting or a Bible study at night would be thrilled to have somebody walk in the door and say, join us for this Bible study, someone of a different race and culture, and said, of course, you're welcome here. This is the house of the Lord. Of course we want you here to study the Bible together. You might look different and you might think different, but we're here as the people of God to show love to you. And then a split second later, to have them gunned down by that very person that they welcomed into their home. I think those kinds of moments in the media and in our kind of social imagination should spark conversation. It should spark really tough questions about the state of race relations in America. And I hope we don't ignore that. I think those are moments that we're pushed to the limit of how real is the gospel to us? How real is the power of God's reconciliation to us? How real is God's justice and love and mercy and grace to us? And those events bring it to the surface in ways that are no longer safe. It's not just about learning the 4 spiritual laws or learning the Romans way. Now it's, well, if the gospel is real, how do you deal with a dead 12-year-old? How do you deal with dead bodies in a church building? So, you don't want to say that that's good, because obviously the circumstances are horrible and just the worst imaginable. But I do hope it sparks conversation for us. I think the reality is starting to hit home. I've written quite extensively, and others have missiologists and historians, that we're at this amazing moment in church history where, one, the obvious reality that the majority of Christians are not in the US and in Europe. The majority of Christians are in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. In fact, that number is just booming. Within the next 40 years, 80% of Christians in the world are going to be of non-European descent. That's amazing. It's kind of a massive historical turnaround. So we really do have to see that the center of Christianity is not in the United States or Canada. It's not in Western Europe. It really is in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And what I've written is that that's also true in American Christianity, even within American Christianity, mainly because of this incredible diversity that God has brought to the United States, where since 1965, the influx of immigrants from Asia, Latin America, and Africa. Initially, scholars said that that's going to mean America is going to become less Christians, but now the thought is America is actually going to be more Christian because of these immigrants. Korean immigrants bringing the church, Latino immigrants bringing storefront churches. It's just actually supporting the growth of the church in America. The white evangelical churches are in decline, but the Asian, Latino, African-American churches are actually growing. So we have this amazing moment where the vibrancy and the vitality in the church is not in your typical middle-class suburban white church. It really is in African-American, Asian, Latino, first and second generation immigrant churches. That's where the life is right now. And I think seeing that, there's a little bit of anxiety about how the church is changing and how American society is changing. And possibly at the root of that is the assumption of exceptionalism. This is very problematic language. And whenever I preach on it, it's the one sermon that every time I preach on, I get hate mail, which is really interesting to me, that whenever I challenge American exceptionalism, that's the one sermon that guarantees that I'll get some kind of hate mail.
That's telling.
That is very telling.
I mean, that should be a red flag to anyone.
That is very telling, that there's this rooted sense of American exceptionalism and American church exceptionalism. The belief that America is going to be the standard bearer for democracy and the church. And the American church will be the standard bearer for all that is good in the world.
Which you can believe if, like you said, you built your entire economic system on the backs of...
Right. That's exactly, again, it's the absence of the understanding of history.
Yeah.
To say, well, we have this great economy, God must have blessed us. Well, not so fast.
Yeah.
We're these great missionaries. Well, not so fast. Let's think about the repercussions of that as well. It's hearkening back to a time when the majority of Americans, the huge population of Americans, were white, middle class, suburban Christians, Protestant. And that's changing. Now you have Hispanic Pentecostals. Now you have Korean Presbyterians, African American Baptists. Those are the faces of Christianity. And so it has nothing to do with spirituality at that point. It's not the fear of, is the church dying in America? The fear is the church is changing in America. American society is changing. So I think that's where the exceptionalism language that we hear in our political dialogue, but I also hear it in the church at times about how America is going to make the world great, how American church is going to do great things to save everybody. Well, I believe that God saves, not individuals in the American church. I believe that it is God who brings salvation and hope into the world, not America, not the American church. And so I think we're going to have to unearth some of these theological lies that I think American Christians have bought into, American exceptionalism, American church exceptionalism. And the second you touch that, that's why I'm saying that's the pushback. To say, well, you're not really a Christian if you don't believe that God has blessed America. I think God has blessed America. But at the same time, I also believe that God has blessed Kenya, and God has blessed Korea, and God has blessed the whole world, and did not pick out America as an exceptional nation to bless. And so I think the struggle here is that when that theological mythology gets challenged, that actually, so many Christians built their faith on that theological myth that American Christians are exceptional, that once you start challenging that, it's hard to recover from that. Where can you go from there? Because you're not going to fix the church because you're exceptional. You're not going to triumph over the enemy, the bad guys, because you're exceptional. So folks are essentially doubling down and said, no, white American exceptionalism is our hope. White American Christian exceptionalism is the way to fix the world's problems. And that's where some of this political animus and conflict is arising. It's the inability to say, God is actually at work in the United States, but through diversity. God is actually moving in the churches in America, but through diverse churches and through immigrant churches and multi-ethnic churches. It's going to be hard medicine for folks to swallow, but I think we're going to have to deal with that reality if we're going to see God continue to move in the United States.